We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weaponry.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is Thanksgiving Eve. I hope you're having a wonderful day. We've got a lot coming up on the program today. No more Tokyo roses trying to destroy our democracy. If Congress wants democracy to survive, it must roll back Citizens United and regulate big tech, forbidding them from allowing foreign governments to pretend to be Americans on social media. I'll get to that in a minute. There's a new progressive news site in town, specifically in Chicago, but it's a national site, and we're going to have their editor on a little later on in this hour. In the second hour of our program, Professor Richard Wolff, the professor of economics, is going to be with us. The world debt right now is over 300 times world GDP, and there's this fascinating piece in the Financial Times this week by Ruchir Sharma arguing that because there's so much debt in the world, that central banks are terrified of trying to raise interest rates to control inflation. This could present a real conundrum to the world economy and maybe even a crisis. And I want to get Professor Wolff's thoughts on that. We'll get into that in the second hour. Mickey Huff is going to drop by the way, the editor of Project Censored. I'm a 4-time recipient of the Project Censored Award. He's going to talk about what they've got this year. And is this secret hedge fund gutting our newsrooms? In our third hour, why is the new chancellor of Germany being called center-left when the conservative who preceded him, Angela Merkel, who's still in office, is actually to the left of Bernie? Isn't this left? We'll get to that in our third hour. And we got a crazy alert about QAnon. Excuse me. QAnon Dallas squatters who've walked away from their lives like medieval crusaders. Seriously, it's just a totally bizarre story. I think I'm going to sneeze again. Pardon me. Okay. So let's jump right into it with another sneeze. Okay, no more Tokyo roses trying to destroy our democracy. No, I don't have COVID. It's just, when it gets cold, I sneeze. The former assistant director of the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, just posted on Twitter. This was day before yesterday. There's another sneeze. Divide and conquer, he writes. A sample of 32,315 pro-Rittenhouse hashtag tweets, November 19th and 20th, showed 29,600 of them had geolocation disabled. Of those, 17,000 were listed as foreign, but a deep scrub revealed that most were in Russia, China, and the European Union. Really? People pretending to be Americans celebrating Kyle Rittenhouse? Snopes looked into this and found that it was even more extensive than what Frank Figliuzzi was documenting. Massive evidence of foreign-based social media accounts pretending to be Americans while cheerleading Rittenhouse. This is how democracies get destroyed from the outside, by planting seeds of hate and division that appear to come from inside and then alter the sentiments of the entire country. You know, democracy is a remarkably resilient form of government, right? We've had arguably a democracy for 240 years. I realize it's been very imperfect in many ways, but here we are. And yet, if people don't believe that that democracy is actually a democracy any longer, it will collapse. And we have seen this in country after country after country. Democracies fail when people cease to trust and support them. It's just that simple. And typically that starts with people perceiving corruption in their democracy. Great example is, by the way, Turkey. Another great example, Egypt. If you are familiar with I won't go into the whole long backstory, but if you're familiar with either of those governments, they're both examples of countries that were functioning democracies, became corrupt oligarchies. That corruption then so highlighted the disintegration of the democracy that at some point the leaders, El-Sisi in Egypt and Erdogan in Turkey, simply stopped pretending that they were democracies anymore. Call out the police, haul people away, put them in jail, shut down the dissenting media, all of that. So if those cracks in the system, if that corruption, if those bad actors are not reprimanded or removed, and if the democracy isn't cleaned up, then democracies go to the second stage of the process of disintegration, which is an explosion of populism. Now, populism is where either people are pouring into the streets demanding leadership, or leadership is emerging, pulling people together, saying, you can't trust the government, they're lying to you, and we need to take it over to clean it up. Populism is the normal and healthy response to a corrupted democracy. It's an attempt to re-regulate, to straighten a democracy back up. Populism is what Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump brought us in 2016. And Donald Trump became president. And he became president on a very, very populist platform. He said he was going to end corruption in D.C. Remember his drain the swamp chants? He said he was going to stop corporations from sending jobs overseas. He said everybody in America was going to have better than Obamacare health care at a very cheap price. These are all populist positions. He said he was going to raise taxes on the rich, on the morbidly rich, and he was going to more tightly regulate our southern border. All of these populist positions. Of course, he lied and he did none of the above. Instead, he brought us the most corrupt administration in history. 5 of his cabinet members, for example, were referred to the Department of Justice by their own agency's inspector general for corruption, for crimes, for felonies. But of course, Bill Barr was just as corrupt as they were, and he didn't do anything about it. But the big point here is that Donald Trump didn't create this situation. This was created by the United States Supreme Court, or at least by 5 conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court, largely with the Citizens United decision. that basically legalize political corruption. And, John Paul Stevens called this out. He said, no. He said, in fact, he essentially predicted foreign trolls taking over our democracy. He said, if taken seriously, our colleague's assumption that the identity of a speaker has no relevance to the government's ability to regulate political speech would lead to some remarkable conclusions. Such an assumption would have accorded the propaganda broadcast to our troops by Tokyo Rose during World War II the same protection as speech by Allied commanders. Tokyo Rose, of course, was that famous woman who was broadcasting to American troops in the Pacific Theater during World War II, telling them, the war is lost and just go home and everything, we got this under control here in Japan. And this is what's going on now. We've got Tokyo Rose all over our traffic, all over our internet traffic, all over our social media. And here's what's so bizarre about it. As Figluzzi is pointing out, there are foreign governments and foreign oligarchs who would love to see democracy fail in the United States. They'd love to see America go totally corrupt so they can say, like Erdogan, hey, America doesn't work either. Don't worry. Just, go along with me. And it turns out it's not just Russia, like, the Mueller report pointed out back in 2016. I mean, they were helping Donald Trump 16 ways to Sunday, but it's not just Russia. There's a bunch of companies involved in this. Now, Netflix, we have a sponsor, ExpressVPN, and one of the ads that I was reading when, this was a couple of months ago, was for ExpressVPN was how, you can use a VPN service to pretend you're in another country, and then you log on to Netflix, and hey, you can get German language, TV and movies off Netflix if you simply use a VPN and pretend you're in Germany. In other words, Netflix knows where you are, or at least believes that they know where you are, which country you're in. The same is obviously true of Twitter and Facebook. Why don't they stop these foreign trolls? Because it's profitable. It's creating churn. It's creating engagement. It's delivering ads to people, which is with their revenue model. So if Congress wants American democracy to survive, there's a very simple two-step process here. I say very simple because, in concept it's very simple. In actual putting it into practice, it's going to mean taking on the corrupt elements of the corruption. But number one, reverse Citizens United. And Congress can do that. And number two, pass legislation regulating big tech, saying that foreign trolls, at the very least, have to be labeled as such. And, if they're pretending to be Americans, just block them, stop them, prevent them. This is not rocket science. No more Tokyo Roses. Right? It's time to put an end to this stuff. Our society is being torn apart by social media trolls pretending to be Americans. And it needs to stop. Okay, 17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll be picking up your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Bart in Benicia, California. Hey, Bart, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just calling in to ask a couple questions, get your opinion. One is, should we change the name of our group from Progressive Democrats to just Democrats? What's your thoughts on name changes and the word progressive?
Yeah, I've been saying for a long time that what progressives need to do is take over the Democratic Party, and then the Democratic Party becomes itself an instrument of progressivism, just like the fascists have taken over the Republican Party. And, it used to be the fascists were the outliers. Now they are the mainstream. And, I think that we need progressives to be the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And by the way, that's happening. It's happening all over the country, which is a good trend. We just need to be, enthusiastically amplifying it.
Right. Does the name progressive in the thought is that the name progressive now currently still has a bit of a stigma. So
I don't think so.
Democratic.
I think it only has a stigma on the right. I think that whole Limbaugh making people afraid to call themselves liberals and progressives. I think that era is gone. And and groups that are named like Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org, they should hang on to that by all means.
Okay, great. Thanks for that one-person poll.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Next question. You raised a lot of alarms, and actually, I listened to David Pakman in different shows, and I love your show, of course. The one thing that I find is that it gets my blood boiling, but then it's sort of like I have no outlet except maybe write a letter, send an email to a congressperson or whatever. My feeling is we got to do more than that. It's just not. I don't think it's enough.
I agree.
So what can we do? What can we physically do?
Well, apropos of the previous question and answer, Bart, get inside your local Democratic Party.
Okay, which I have, which I'm getting involved.
That's the number one thing. I mean, become a precinct committee person. Be one of the people who makes the rules, and that's what we need. We need progressives inside the Democratic Party in positions of local leadership, and that way you grow the party from the base up. I mean, here's this incredible opportunity. It's like, if you and I were sitting around saying, hey, how do we take over MSNBC? Well, you need a couple $1 billion. How do you take over the Democratic Party, which is, by the way, $1 billion corporation, right? It's a nonprofit, but it's a giant $1 billion corporation. How do you take it over? You just show up. It's like there's no other opportunity this cool in America that I know of.
Yeah, getting involved, which is one good outlet actually. Although
right, and then pick whatever your favorite issue is. If you're passionate about climate change, join the Sunrise Movement or one of the other movements that are that are focused on that. If you're passionate about voting rights, get active with the ACLU and. Not the NAACP. I mean, there are specific voting rights organizations. I'm sorry, the names of them don't come right to the tip of my tongue, but there are, for example, Eric Holder has got this organization, and a quick Google and you can find the name of it. He's been on this program, and they're doing great work to fight gerrymandering and to promote voting rights. And there's basically there's a group for every concern. You've got Progressive Democrats of America, you've got Indivisible, you've got Our Revolution. There's, of course, the old standby of, MoveOn.org. I mean, there's just lots and lots of opportunities. Bart, thanks for the call and good luck. Good luck. Get out there, get active, tag you're it, right? 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on the ground, get out the vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom, and I'll try to be quick. Hey, I want to thank you for your show on JFK, and I just want to say that, I was looking at it from a systemic point of view, and you mentioned a couple of times that you were afraid that the JFK thing would trigger World War III. You were right to be afraid. Those systemic problems have not gone away, and I would tell you it's even worse. If you're really worried about World War III, it's even worse.
Yeah.
And as far as this information, this disinformation that's permeating America, I am 90% sure that is originating from advanced research sections, like Cozy Bear and all those others in Russia, primarily because, look, Vladimir Putin, I was wondering the connection between Putin and Trump. Vladimir Putin is a real patriot, okay? That doesn't mean he's an ultra-nationalist, but he is a patriot. He's got problems on the right and the left in Russia. Donald Trump treats him like a Moscow cab driver, and Vladimir Putin is exploiting that. We are so close to World War III with what's going on in the Baltic right now. I can tell you that I am almost certain that what's going to end up happening is the right-wing government in Poland and the right-wing government in Belarus are going to split the Ukraine with Russia's help, just like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in World War II.
Whoa.
And remember, it was Poland last time. It was Poland then. This time it's going to be the Ukraine. They are going to get split, all right? And Russia is trying this. Valery Gerasimov is a general, okay? He's very smart. He's trying this hybrid model of warfare. This is the way the Chinese always operate, in this hybrid model, what we would call a hybrid model of warfare. This is new to Russia. 22 million Russians lost their lives fighting Nazi Germany. They know if it doesn't work, they're going to go with what they know. And what they know is to blow stuff up. I mean, just total savage warfare. And the thing is I'm worried about this happening. And also China, I don't know if you heard about all those double agents China caught in like 2 days, like 200 of them. And they asked a CIA guy about this, and he's on BBC. And they said, look, there's this rumor that China has hacked the network where America keeps all this double agent information. Well, long story short, that is like when we hacked Enigma from the Nazis. That is huge. That is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And if China has that, yes, and if they have, of course the CIA guy denied it. But if that is true, that puts Russia in a very backwards-looking position. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
China,
did you see just a couple of weeks
ally.
ago that China and Russia were joining together on I forget exactly what it was they were doing, but it was I believe it was some sort of joint defense exercise, wasn't it?
Yes. And don't get, all right, look, what I'm saying is the pressure, they are allies, all right? But I don't want to sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth. But China, if they have cracked a code that Russia has never even come close to, that puts them in a subordinate position, you see? Mm-hmm. And I think that is accelerating this animus. Look, Joe Biden even said that in France, right now, gas prices are $7 a gallon.
They've been in that neighborhood forever, Dave. I mean, gas in Europe costs 2 to 3 times what it does here in the U.S. because of taxes.
Yes, but France has always maintained its special forces, like a very robust special forces presence in North Africa. This whole time, Russia has been antagonizing them in North Africa. Look, I mean, I'm worried about...
Dave, I'm sorry, I got to run, but I agree with you. These are dangerous times. Thank you so much for the call. 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. By the way, unemployment, a 50-year low. That Biden administration is really doing great stuff.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Unemployment, the lowest it's been in 50 years, and the Biden administration put a $100 fine on every container stuck in the ports. And guess what? The ports aren't stuck anymore. It's amazing how that works, right? Oh, man. But, you know, you won't really hear much about that in the media because that's just good news. And good news when you have a Democratic administration. And, you know, that just doesn't happen. So, anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Russ in Hickory Hill, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
It might be a wasted call, but how come when we were done, you got to tell me how much Zorro's worth. How come the billionaires ain't pounding about $10 billion into the Asian radio market? Every time I turn on the TV, they're number 2 right behind the Hispanics in Texas. Second fastest growing in Virginia, Georgia, Southwest, California, and you name it, Tom. They are growing like ragweed. How come we ain't getting in all these billionaires throwing about $10 billion in the radio stations to smooth them to vote for us? Because I'll tell you what, in Texas, we went from 61 to 58%. This idiot...
You're talking white people?
Trump went... Well, no. The Hispanics, we dropped from 61 to 58 in the last election. Trump went from 34 to 40 because of, like you say, they're pounding that market. How come we ain't pounding the Asian market? They're the second fastest growing.
You know, I know very little about this, Russ. First of all, Asian is a huge category. I mean, you've got people who speak Japanese, you got people who speak Korean, you have people who speak Chinese. You know, so number one, and number two, I just don't know about those numbers. But I think that, you know, starting with the Hispanic market in the United States would be a good idea. And I have no idea what George Soros is worth. Russ, thanks for the call. Barbara in Seattle. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you. I have a question. Of the DOD defense budget, you know, what percentage is spent on private contractors?
That's a damn good question.
I've tried to look it up, and I don't get a lot of results.
No, it's impossible to find. I went off on a search for that very question. About a month and a half ago when I was actually it was more like 4 or 5 months ago when I was working on my book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, that'll be out next year, and I was looking for given that for example Snowden, he worked for a private intelligence company that was contracting with the NSA. He didn't work for the NSA. He worked for a contractor. In Iraq and Afghanistan, they were hiring people to be cooks for $100,000 a year, and then when bases get overrun, the soldiers had to protect the cooks as well as everybody else. Whereas, it used to be the cook was a GI who could just pick up his rifle and go march right into the fight, if the base was overrun. And I mean, it's crazy, Barbara. And I was unable to find any kind of breakout at all. The Defense Department's budget is hugely opaque, as is the DOD itself, and of course it's never been successfully audited. So we just don't know. They're to the best of my knowledge, and if anybody does know, give us a call and let us know, or tweet me or something. But I looked for this for the better part of a day and a half. I mean, I put a serious time into this and could not find anything that although it's substantial. It is really substantial. I mean, there are some people who are guesstimating that it could be up to half of a major portion of the defense budget. So, hundreds of billions of dollars certainly is going into the contractors, and it's not right. It's absolutely not right. Barbara, thank you for the call. Great question. Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I have a question about the billionaires. I hear a lot of people justifying how they're billionaires because they give a lot of money to charity and they pay low taxes, but it's okay because they're giving to charity. What would be your response to that? And do they get a tax deduction for giving to charity? Does it really just benefit them themselves?
Yeah, if you itemize on your taxes, you can get a deduction for charitable contributions. I don't know exactly what percentage it is, how large it is, what the limits on it are, but it's there. And there are much more sophisticated ways to do that with things like private foundations and stuff that the morbidly rich use all the time. The larger question, though, Dennis, that you raise is the one of, what is the appropriate realm for government when it has to do with the welfare, the general welfare of the people, and what is the appropriate role of private charity? And I would submit to you that when we're talking about core human needs, health care, housing, food, education, that these are all the responsibilities of government. These are the reasons why we create government, to protect ourselves in these regards, in these core human needs. And then private charity kind of fills in the edges. Private charity can accommodate religion or art or great literature or help improve maybe education or things like that. But in the United States, we've had this battle between conservatives and Americans for years and years, where the conservatives have taken the position that, no, government shouldn't be doing these things. You should just rely on the billionaires for all of these things. Libraries, museums, everything else. It should all be privatized. And, I strongly disagree with that. I think that government should be providing these base functions like government does in every other developed democracy in the world. You don't have student debt in Canada or in Europe. You don't have medical bankruptcies in Canada or in Europe. You have a fraction of the level of homelessness in those countries. I'm going to do a whole rant about this in the third hour, just specific to Germany, about what Germany is up to right now. But you don't have many of the problems that we have in the United States. And conservatives, particularly right-wing billionaires, don't want to be taxed to pay for this. And so they throw the dog a bone, oh yeah, we're going to help out. But I mean, for example, I saw an ad on TV the other day for Danny Thomas's, Shriners Children's Hospital, I think it's called. And it's no, that's not, is that the Shriners or is it Danny Thomas's? St. Jude's, that's what it is. Thank you, Sean. St. Jude's Hospital. And I'm like, this is a wonderful thing. And when Danny Thomas did this, there was basically no, health infrastructure for America. It was just a wonderful thing back in the 1950s and 60s. But today, we should not have hospitals treating children with cancer with private contributions. This should be a function of our government. Why do we, why is anybody having to make contributions to a private charity to care for children with cancer? We're literally the only country in the developed world that has that kind of a situation. So, Dennis, thank you. But that's my rant on that. Dennis, from Dennis to Dennis. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind?
Well, I was going to talk about all the trolls on YouTube, but I want to talk about what the other Dennis was just saying now, because it's something that's hit me. Because I've given money to various organizations, I get deluged with organizations asking me to give money.
Yeah, me too.
And, it comes in the mail, which, you can imagine. I mean, how the mail gets stuffed up with all these, and they're great organizations, many of them. I think some of them might not be. They just are probably trying to grift. Like maybe the World Wildlife Fund. I've heard some very negative things about them. But, I get a little bit sick of it. And I think the same thing. Why do we have government? I mean, this is what Franklin Roosevelt did back in the 1930s. He used government to help the United States of America get out of a deep depression, basically caused by trickle-down economics that Andrew Mellon invented in 1921.
Yes, absolutely. As the Treasury Secretary for Warren Harding, and as I recall,
yes,
yeah. And
you're right. He was Harding.
Yeah, and Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover all took the position, and they all continued to. Well, Harding was dead by then, but they all continued to take this position when the Great Depression happened. In 1929, the Republican Great Depression, the Great Crash. That these problems should be solved by private charity. That's the province, and John Rockefeller in the 1920s or the 19-teens out there in New York City passing out shiny new dimes as his PR guy was, calling up the New York Times. Yeah, it's time for government to step up in the United States. I'm with you, Dennis. Thank you very much. John in Center Ospey, New Hampshire. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm great. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. What's up?
Yes, same to you and your family as well. Just something that's been battling in my mind back and forth. And I don't know. I mean, just the whole deal with the voting rights back and forth, and now they're fighting the gerrymandering. You mentioned Eric Holder fighting that battle.
Right.
Do you truly believe there's enough time from now between the next election for that to happen?
Well, my concern is that every day that goes by that Congress does not pass one of these voting rights laws that would restrict gerrymandering, you get another state that succeeds in completing a massive gerrymander that throws another 2 or 3 seats, in some cases even 4 or 5, to the Republicans in the House of Representatives, making it anywhere from difficult to impossible for the Democrats to hang on to their majority in the House right now. And I mean, this is all structural stuff. The Republicans are masters at it. They've been doing it for years and years. And the only reason that they haven't been stopped, and frankly, we should have passed these laws before Texas finalized their maps. But the only reason we haven't is because, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have been saying, no, we can't fiddle with the filibuster. The billionaires who are helping us out like that filibuster. John, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And now we have my colleague Joe Madison, on a hunger strike over this, literally taking his life in his hands to try to highlight this issue. We all need to be talking about it. And welcome back, John in Biloxi, Mississippi. Hey, John, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk to you about the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
Yeah.
And how President Biden had made his point on Kyle Rittenhouse, but I think that they're getting ready to have a defamation lawsuit because of it.
What do you mean?
I wanted to get your
Rittenhouse is talking about suing Biden. You can't do that. You can't sue the president of the United States. You have sovereign immunity. He has sovereign immunity.
All right, and
it's
then
just bluster for the hard right. That's all.
I wanted to ask you also about, because what's her name, Ghislaine Maxwell? She just was her judge got changed by President Biden too. And I just was curious what your opinion on that was.
I know nothing about that. I saw the article maybe a week or two ago where she was talking about rats in the jail cells and stuff, and how creeped out she was that the guards were watching her shower, and so she was down to showering 3 days a week. I mean, being in jail is no fun. Being in jail is miserable, miserable stuff. But the crimes that she's accused of.
The Kyle Rittenhouse case was something that was distracted from, because I know that's a big deal. They've been pushing it for years now, and now they don't want to cover it. It's like, well, what's going on with that?
You mean the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, that whole thing? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, well, there's apparently a lot of very rich and powerful people who are sucked into that machine, and they're a little wary about it. John, thanks for the call. Charles in Sacramento. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to do a quick comment on how this tradition of foreign meddling and psyops, if you want to call them that, These go back to the late 30s, early 40s, when the Nazis, through the German embassy in D.C., would subsidize American journalists and right-wing publications to push a pro-German message, and they actually paid American congressmen to give anti-war speeches just to avoid the U.S. from interrupting German conquest.
Yeah, that was part of the whole was Liberty. There was a group called Liberty something, and there was also the American First Movement.
There's several.
Yeah, the Liberty League.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucky Lindy, right? Charles Lindbergh was out there saying,
shirt, the Bundist, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I get it. And by the way, we've done this too, Charles. I mean, we before Pinochet overthrew the government, the Allende government of Chile in, was it March of 73, as I recall, or maybe August of 73, whatever it was in 1973. Prior to that, we were sending, information, we were kind of seeding their channels of public information. And we've done this in other countries as well. We disrupt countries. We've been doing it for decades. We've been doing it probably for centuries. And so, it's nothing new, but, it doesn't mean that you just sit back and let it happen to yourself.
Absolutely. I remember I learned a lot about this actually from you because you recommended that book, Illustrious Dunderheads.
Oh, yeah. By Rick
documents
Stout.
all of this.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a very rare book.
Oh, it is. Yeah. It's, back when my dad gave me that copy for my birthday, it was probably $30 on eBay. Now they're like $700-800. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably because I've been talking about it so much over the years. People have bought them all up. Charles, thanks for the call. It's spot on. And the Nazi influence in the United States from 1933 to 1937 was huge. Huge. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. On the line with us is Tim Hogan. Tim is he's formerly a Democratic strategist with Amy Klobuchar, but he is the newly minted executive editor of a new digital newsroom, Heartland Signal. And the website is heartlandsignal.com. And it's in part sponsored by WCPT, our Chicago affiliate, and the people behind that. Tim, tell us about Heartland Signal.
Hey, Tom, it's great to be on. So we launched Heartland Signal last week. It is a place where you can go to get all your news about the midterms in 2022 with a focus on what's happening in the Midwest. And what we're doing here is we're filling a gap that has been left behind by newsrooms cutting resources, losing local reporters that for the longest time we've seen conservatives over decades do honestly a very good job of building media infrastructure. And so what we're doing is providing a little bit of surge capacity and covering stories that fall through the cracks in that region. And I'd point to two things as an example right now. Number one, on our page, heartlandsignal.com, our featured story is about Ashley Hinson, who's a Republican congresswoman from Iowa's 1st Congressional District. She was on the floor, voted against the reconciliation legislation that included funding for childcare. And then she turned around 5 hours later, held a virtual roundtable with constituents in her district about the need to fund childcare. And that's something we didn't see covered anywhere else, and we thought it was a little suspicious. So we sent a reporter to cover that story.
That's amazing. We're talking with Tim Hogan, who is formerly worked with Amy Klobuchar and was a Democratic strategist, a newly minted executive editor of this brand new website that you need to check out. It's called Heartland, or it's the URL is heartlandsignal.com, and it's just remarkable. Tim, what can people expect there as they're going for, if somebody puts that in a pinned tab and checks it every day, how often are you updating it? What are your plans for this website going forward?
Yeah, well, we're going to update it every day. We have reporters dedicated to digging through news of the day and what's not being covered. I would also say you should find us on Twitter. You should follow us on Twitter. It's simply at heartlandsignal.com. And one thing we put out there yesterday that was not getting coverage, and now we have nearly 200,000 views of this video that's being shared. J.D. Vance, who is a Senate candidate in Ohio, was on Newsmax yesterday talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, and he said that we should be promoting the types of virtues that exist in Kyle Rittenhouse because he, quote, made good decisions and, quote, decided to be a positive force in his community. And it's looking through that type of media that we're not seeing covered on mainstream press. But people should know that, independent of how the trial turned out, that the right wing is really propping up Kyle Rittenhouse, and a lot of their candidates are rushing to his aid as well. He was at Mar-a-Lago with former President Trump, but those are the types of things that we're going to cover. And I would just give a sneak peek of what we're going to be looking at over Thanksgiving is a list of all of the moments when House Republicans have claimed credit for projects in their district from either the American Rescue Plan or funding that's coming from the infrastructure bill that they voted against. So they're very thankful for the Democrats for passing this legislation and helping them get that money.
Yeah. And J.D. Vance, wasn't he a hedge fund millionaire? He had something to do with Wall Street that made him richer than sin. And then, he wrote Hillbilly Elegy that was like, and suddenly everybody was like, oh, gee, the hillbillies are really an oppressed bunch. And, and it's like, what?
Yeah, J.D. Vance seems to be going through a constant identity crisis. He's a big tech guy who now hates big tech, and his campaign is backed by Peter Thiel. Yes, and, also a guy, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy and who in 2016 tweeted pretty frequently about how he really didn't like Donald Trump, and now he's trying to do an about-face because, he's running against Josh Mandel, who is very Trumpy, and he's in a Republican primary. So he's changing his tune. Yeah,
Josh Mandel is the cousin of Ellen Ratner, who used to do the news on our show, every day, 5 days a week for years, an old and dear friend of mine. And she describes him as, crazy cousin Josh. I mean, I'm guessing that Vance is going to beat Mandel, but that he probably isn't going to prevail in that election. What's your sense of that? I mean, that's the next, it's, I guess, 2 states over from you, but this is just Ohio. It's right there in the Midwest.
Right. No, it'll be very interesting. I think a lot of the people who are getting coverage in that race because they continue to say incendiary things are J.D. Vance and Josh Mandel. I would say Jane Timken is someone that we're watching as well, though. She's the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party and is not as out there as both of them. She has a bunch of baggage as well, including being tied to some outsourcing of jobs from the state. But that primary is going to be very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and around the country, are there any other races that you think we should really be flagging, watching?
Well, we are in a region where our signal from WCPT, it reaches 8 of the 10 largest cities in Wisconsin. So we're focused on a lot of the big marquee races there, which includes, Ron Johnson, who has not said that he's going to run, but is really hinting at it. We'll be watching that state as well.
Yeah, Ron Johnson. Talk about a character. Okay, the website is heartlandsignal.com. Well, it's also the Twitter handle at heartlandsignal. You got to check it out. Tim Hogan is the executive editor over Heartland Signal. Check it out. Tim, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Great talking with you. Good luck.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. We'll be right back. It's, we're hitting the top of the hour here.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for newsreaders. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction. The disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's also available as an ebook. Democracyatwork.info, rdwolf.com, and Prof. Wolff with two Fs. Is his Twitter handle. Professor Wolff, welcome back. There is this fascinating article by Ruchir Sharma in the Financial Times this week, pointing out that there's this massive level of global debt, several hundred times GDP, in fact, as I recall, 350% of GDP, global GDP, and that the central banks are like afraid to raise interest rates to control inflation for fear that it'll make that debt unpayable and thus trigger a whole, knock-on, domino falling consequence of governments and companies all over the world collapsing. Is this a Holocaust situation? Or Holocaust is the wrong word. What's the word? End of days kind of scenario economically?
Well, it certainly is a basic contradiction that this capitalist system has worked its way into. Let's start with the inflation. We had gotten used to not having one, even though we were in a situation where it might have happened. So we got complacent, we got lazy. I'm using the we in the old royal sense, above all the Federal Reserve. And so it flooded the economy with money, and people began to say, gee, things could get very hairy if all that extra money stopped going into the stock market, where it fueled an enormous increase in stock prices, thereby making the richest 10% of Americans much richer than they had been and much further from the average American. We've gotten to the point now where the money is beginning to hesitate about going into the stock market to boost those prices even higher, and starting to look for other things to be spent on. And so we get the long-delayed inflation now running 6 to 7% in the United States, and threatening to go further. And here comes the contradiction. Over the last 20 years, when interest rates were kept very, very low by historical standards, and in many cases going below zero, negative, every bank, every government, every corporation, virtually without exception, borrowed more money than they had ever borrowed before. So the level of debt is enormous. And of course, the debt you have to pay back. You know, a portion of whatever it is you owe as a company, as an individual, as a government, you have to pay back literally every week or every month. And when you do, you typically do what we call roll over the debt. In other words, you pay back, and the way you do it is by borrowing the same amount again. But here comes the problem. If, in order to slow down an inflation, the Federal Reserve or any central bank pulls money out of the system, it drives interest rates up. And when you re-borrow to replace the money you have to pay back, you're going to have to pay a higher interest than you were used to. And that's where the Financial Times article comes in. It points out that for governments, for corporations, and for households, if interest rates rise, they are suddenly going to be shocked by an enormous amount of money they can no longer spend on anything else other than paying back whoever lent them the money, which is often the central bank itself. And when you add all of this up, here's the conundrum, the problem. In order to fight the inflation, which you have to do if you're a politician because it threatens you, it certainly, as the polls show, is threatening Mr. Biden, in order to get rid of the inflation, you jack up the interest rates and thereby plunge everybody into the morass of trying to figure out how to pay for the enormous debts you ran up. If you recall that we reduced interest rates in order to cope with the crashes of 2000, 2008, and last year, then you see again that this is a system in such deep trouble that everything it does to solve one problem immediately provokes the next one. And usually, if you're smart, you begin to understand, as my book tries to say, the system is the problem, not this or that contradiction or dilemma that confronts it.
So how might this play out? Let's say that the European Central Bank, the Chinese Central Bank, the Japanese Central Bank, and the Fed, our central bank, all get together and decide collaboratively, you know, inflation worldwide, and so far it looks like it might be a blip, but, you know, all get together and decide inflation worldwide is a problem that we have to do something about. The main tool, the main, you know, monetary policy tool that we've got to do this is raising interest rates, and we're going to raise worldwide interest rates by, say, you know, just a couple hundred basis points, you know, 0.3%, 0.5%, something like, you know, 500 basis points. Not a lot, but enough that now suddenly a lot of governments can't repay debts. They can't even conduct normal business any longer because they're having to reallocate money that they would have spent on housing or food or even their military. Now they've got to reallocate that to paying back debt. And you've got corporations around the world that are massively in debt. You've got billionaires who are living off borrowed money. You know, I mean, how does it play out? What happens? How does this affect the average person? First of all, what do we see on our TV screens? How does the world start crumbling? And then directly, what impact does that have on somebody who's got, some money in a retirement account or somebody, a checking account, or somebody who's in debt? Does it help them or hurt them?
Well, it's complicated, as these things always are. Some of this you're already seeing. First, everyone has to remember that debts are different. One company compared to another, even in the same industry, will have decided to borrow more relative to others. Companies with executives who wanted to pad their payroll for themselves went into heavier debt than in other companies where CEOs weren't quite so free to act. So it impacts very differently, and you can see that already because some things have gone up in price very dramatically, food of certain kinds, but not others. Rental cars, fees have gone crazy, but not other kinds of rental. So it's very variable. And how you will be personally affected depends on how all these varying impacts play out in your particular life. Then there's the question of getting everybody together. You said that very casually as if that's easy. It isn't, Tom, because different countries have very different rates of inflation. Europe's inflation is much lower than the one we are now experiencing. And their politicians are going to be in no great rush to do something scary and dangerous like raise interest rates when they're not feeling the pressure of an inflation the way Mr. Biden is. And the same goes for the Chinese, the Japanese, the British, or anybody else. But the general answer to your question is this. Inflations hurt everybody who can't make sure that their own income is helping them get through it. And here's what that means. If you're a corporation, one of the things you can do when you face an inflation, rising prices for what you buy, is to jack up the price of what you get. In other words, raise your own prices, which is one of the ways that inflations feed on themselves. Once they get going, everybody tries to cope with them by raising their prices. This is easy for an employer usually to do, or at least easier than for a worker who is stuck with a contract, for example, that runs another couple of years. Typical contracts in unionized places in this country run 3 years. So you can't do anything about your wage to keep up with what's going on with prices until you don't have a contract. And if you don't have any contract, you're not in a unionized place, which most workers aren't, well, then your employer is able to threaten you. If you demand a wage higher than you have been getting, in order to cope with inflation, the employer will replace you with a machine, will have a greater incentive to leave the country to go to where wages are not rising or at least are much lower, thereby accelerating all of that kind of problem. So, I could go on, but it depends on each individual situation, where you work, what kinds of goods you buy more than your neighbor does, how this will impact you. But the biggest danger is, if you look at the averages in the United States, the prices are going up faster than wages, which should surprise nobody, since Americans are already unable to live on average on their wage income. This situation will either mean they borrow more, which only makes the problem worse, or they suffer a falling standard of living, which is quite something to dump on an American working class that has come through 3 crashes in the last 20 years, worsening inequality every single year, and the worst pandemic together with crisis of the last 2 years. To say you've come through all of that, here, let's give you a declining standard of living because prices are going up than wages, you're going to have real trouble in the streets of the United States. And I think the statistics about the number of workers quitting, or the statistics about rising strikes and the polling numbers indicating young people particularly are taking a new and much more positive look at the labor movement and unionization, those are all signs that the governments facing an inflation are desperate to do something and will turn to the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. But one last point. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2018, the Federal Reserve tried, for many of the same reasons, to play around with raising interest rates. Believe it was the autumn of 2018. It's not exactly in my head right now. The stock market immediately took a tremendous dive, and since nowadays the major donors to political campaigns are the people who own the stocks, that got stopped real quickly, and we're back at that same place now.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating dynamic. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff on Twitter. Professor Wolff, thank you. Thank you again for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
My pleasure. And happy Thanksgiving. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Yeah, Tom, there's a million things I could say because I've been watching your program as I proceeded with your topics and stuff. But when you were shaking your head about how not enough good news gets into the media, the reason for that is that misery sells. I was in sales and marketing for 35 years. Demographics and market share are the key items that control this planet, basically. And if, for example, if Rachel Maddow came on one evening and said, women's reproductive rights, the environment, civil rights, consumer rights are all in order, things are working out, and said, I'll see you tomorrow, that'd be it, as opposed to saying, tune in at 6, and tomorrow I'll tell you how you're all going to die. You see what I mean? It's scary stuff.
No, it's the old saying was, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right, and then the things that are growing in this country are repossession, collection agencies, and pawn shops. It's getting scary.
Yeah,
One of
and
my
dollar
neighbors
stores.
sold his pawn shop. Yeah, one of my neighbors sold his pawn shop, and now he travels the country collecting more money than he knows what to do with, helping people take the last dime people have. You see what I mean? It's scary stuff.
Yeah.
And then he brags about it.
Yeah.
And you've got over 10 million people now are 90 days late in their car payments. I was in the auto industry for 20 years, Those people, what if they lose their car and they can't go to work?
Right. It's a tough time, and my sense is that we're on the precipice of something. I don't know exactly what it is or how it's going to play out, but 40 years of neoliberalism has just kneecapped this country and our economy. Tim, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. Norma in Montgomery. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
As usual, lots.
We have about 2 minutes.
Okay. What I want is everybody this weekend, while you're sitting around with your family, please start talking to them about the benefits of Build Back Better. If we can get people to understand that this plan would provide child care. I spoke to a woman this morning, a service provider, that pays $800 a month for her 5-year-old and 2-year-old. How much do you think this young black lady makes in the state of Alabama?
I don't know.
Okay, so if we can get people to understand, I talked last week about how much my neighbor paid over 4 years, almost $400,000 in long-term care, 24/7, to take care of his father. Luckily, their mother came from an extremely wealthy family, and they could afford it. Most of us can't pay $12 an hour for 24 hours, $288 a day. But if we could sit down and talk to our family and friends over the weekend about what this plan would do for us, and not talk about it being Republican or Democratic, but talk about what it means to the American people, then we might get somewhere. But you can't just... Excuse me, I was in the closet. I'm out of breath.
It's okay.
But if we can sit down and talk to people about this because, like here in Alabama, for those who don't know it, there is a meeting on December the 14th at 9 a.m. in the RSA building to raise rates for Alabama Power. Most people don't know. We need to get the word out and teach people.
I'm with you. And Thanksgiving will be a great opportunity, if you do it in a way that's a little less partisan. Norma, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. That's great. And happy Thanksgiving to you, Norma.
You too, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at ThomHartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished, and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Back at you.
All right. Medicare will wither on the vine. 25 years ago, Newt Gingrich and the Republicans said that, and we crushed them on it. We took that slogan, and we pushed them at it, and we were able to crush them with that saying. And today, Medicare is actually withering on the vine because of Medicare disadvantage.
Yep.
And I've been thinking about this and saying, why could we do it then, but we can't seem to do it now? I don't expect you to have an answer, but it's something that's starting to gnaw at me.
Well, it's George W. Bush and the Republicans in 2003 put this cancer, a Medicare Advantage, into the Medicare system, and that cancer has been growing. It's been metastasizing. It's now almost half of all Medicare. It's privatization. They have effectively and successfully privatized almost half of the entire Medicare system without anybody raising an alarm. It's just astonishing.
Yeah, it is to me. But I guess I almost want to blame our leadership for not fighting back better, but I'm not going to do that because I think we've gotten better leadership. But I just feel like we're missing out on a very valuable message that we could be pushing for the public to hear, and I guess I'm disappointed in that. Not in you, but...
no, I get it. I get it, Ziggy. And Democratic leadership should have been fighting this like hell ever since 2003, and they should have called it out for what it was at the time. And it's this... I'm seeing the same thing now with this state and local tax. The SALT deduction. This was something that Donald Trump included in his big tax cut in 2017 just to screw with people in blue states. Because you've got people in blue states who, between their property taxes and their income taxes, and I'm not talking about rich people, I'm talking just people at the top end of the middle class who are paying over $10,000 a year in combined property taxes and state income taxes. And he capped what they could deduct from their federal taxes at $10,000 a year, just to take basically the college-educated, upper middle income people to get them pissed off at their local Democratic elected officials. And now the Republicans are running ads going, oh, the Democrats want to cut taxes on millionaires and billionaires. it's like, and they're only able to get away with it because the Democrats never pointed out in the first place that this was just a naked political attack on people who live in cities and in blue states. Ziggy, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I share your frustration. Democrats need to get better at messaging.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That's why I wrote that book, Cracking the Code, the Communications Code, back in 2008, about how to communicate for politics. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious. Whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guineans' name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, Sekouture. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Hey, craft your way to... is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, you know, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, we will know what the verdict is in the case of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. So I'll fill you in on that as soon as it happens. So back to your phone calls. Teresa in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I was thinking back to your conversation about government versus charity for the services, and it brought to mind Cornel West has a saying. He says, charity is not justice. And I got to thinking about that, like, okay, what does that mean? And I sort of figured out in my own mind it means that, charity is like you get a meal because I'm feeling generous. That's charity. Right. Justice is you get a meal because you're a human being and that's your right. Correct. That's a brilliant analysis, Teresa. It's yeah, perfect. Isn't that a great way to think about it? And, maybe if it comes up at Thanksgiving, there's a pithy little saying you can bring out. There you go. Teresa, thank you so much for that. That was perfect. That was perfect. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I appreciate Teresa's comments. And also I wanted to say that the millionaires and billionaires, they rather give charity than just pay their fair share of taxes, Tom. Exactly. Or bring all of that money abroad, right? Remember, Trump promised all of the money that was going to come flowing in from those offshore accounts, right? Mm-hmm. That never happened. So it just seems to me that when you, for example, Bezos, I think gave $100 million to the guy at CNN. I forget his name. And but it just seems to me it would be more equitable if the CEOs of this country would pay their fair share. I'm with you. $100 million is chump change for Jeff Bezos. Thank you, Tom. So I didn't get excited about that. However, I do know, Tom, that the CEOs and the corporations, we've seen how they behaved in this pandemic, and it's been just despicable because they could have influenced Trump to do more, to tell the truth, and to shut the company down for that first 3-month period so that we could recoup and then rebound.
Yeah.
So,
and they've made an additional $4 trillion in the last 2 years. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Thank you. I mean, Tom, how much money do you need? I mean, just the greediness of it. You said good news, Tom. Here in Chicago, our mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and I disagree with her on many things, but she has implemented a $30 million pilot program for universal income. And what's going to happen is 5,000 families will receive monthly $500.
Yeah, we reported on that a while ago. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing how this works out. You know, by the way, we've been doing this in here in the United States. The state of Alaska has been doing this since the 1950s.
And there's no reason, really, we can't have it. This country do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're just taking money from they're taking tax money from the oil revenue, and they charge a fee for the oil that's pumped out, and every year, everybody in Alaska, literally, man, woman, child, doesn't matter, gets it, between $1,000 and $3,000 or $4,000 every year. And in fact, when Sarah Palin was running for vice president, she jacked it up to the point where I think just her family made something like $40,000, in that annual payment.
I mean, that's really unbelievable. But Tom, if I may leave you with 2 questions, please. Can you recall, because I remember how many times the Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare. Yeah. I cannot recall the Democratic Party, at least in my recent memory, trying to recall any of the just draconian legislation created by the Republicans. That's my first question. Can you recall any of that? And then also regarding voting rights, Joe Madison, I thank him. Tom, if we don't get voting rights, federal voting rights, and I don't know what's the holdup with Biden, if you could possibly talk about why would he be reluctant to push on that, particularly now?
I don't think he is. I think he wanted to get his economic legacy set, and the theory was that if he could pass the 2 big economic bills, that would give him enough political capital, enough wind at his back, that what's frankly a bigger lift, because this is the core of the Republican strategy going forward, is voter suppression. That would give him
to carve out something in the filibuster.
That's correct.
Even if that has to be done.
That's correct. That getting it wasn't that he said the economic agenda is more important than voting rights. It's that he said if I pass the economic agenda first, I'm going to have considerably more political power that I can use for voting rights. Whereas if I pass voting rights first, that's going to be a bloody battle, and my political power will be diminished, and we'll never get around to the economic agenda.
And there are some great things in this Build Back Better, and I'm trying to get that message out as well. But child care, then the tax credit, that's huge.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff.
It's life-changing, yes.
Amen. Pam, thanks a lot. Thanks so much for the call, and I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Thank you, Tom, and the listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Brother, I hope we got some time. Look here, I was listening to your conversation with Lamar Walton regarding the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and it brought back a few books that I had read over my lifetime. One of them was called Special Operations and Their Impact on the Vietnam War by David Ratcliffe. Did you know that before the president was assassinated that the story was out halfway around the world? Okay, there's another book by David Talbot. It's called The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of American People. I was hoping when you didn't mention Alan, that was not sent, it wasn't nothing wrong, but I didn't hear Alan Dulles' name until you read the next day. You was reading from a book called Nuking the Moon or something like that. Then you mentioned Alan Dulles' name. But with your conversation with Lamar Walden, I was waiting to hear from it, hear his name, but I didn't hear it. But you know darn well he had an impact on the assassination of the president, and also that Harry S. Truman, he regretted, the CIA was started under his administration.
Well, it was the OSS before that, but yeah.
But he regretted the establishment of that. okay? And he wrote an op-ed, I guess that's what you call it, saying we shouldn't have done that. And your boy Alan Dulles went down to visit him and saying, retract all of that. And then there was another book that came to mind, was called Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, where you talk about the Sullivan Law Firm and Conchita Banana. What I'm trying to say is all of that I believe, that spirit was interrelated to the assassination of the president. And I think at the end of the day, it was all about some money, Professor. That's just my own personal opinion. But I just wanted to say that, and thank you for giving me this time to make that comment.
You're welcome, Morris. By the way, the verdict was just handed down in the trial on the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and all 3 defendants were just convicted of murder in Georgia. So, Morris hung up the phone. Good news, though. I've been hoping that we would get something to balance, what's been going on with the Rittenhouse trial. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Happy Tofurkey to you.
Thank you.
And great news there on Arbery. I was worried that a pattern was going to emerge on us after last week.
Yeah.
Listen, we're going to get your opinion and maybe issue a little bit of a warning to everybody out there. I got introduced to a new tactic by my local police a few weeks ago. Came banging on my door claiming that there was a pinging cell phone inside my house, and it was belonging to a minor, a young girl. And, of course, I knew that to not be true, but I had to balance my Fourth Amendment against, these guys coming in hard with a lot of cops and dogs and destroying my place. So, wondering if you've ever seen that as,
no. But it's not uncommon for police to try to use excuses, particularly since the Supreme Court ruled, I don't know, a decade or so ago that the police don't have to tell you the truth anymore.
Well, that's when you've been Mirandized and you're a suspect. Yeah, they can tell you your buddy's down the hall giving it up. But coming at a homeowner to totally circumnavigate the Fourth Amendment, I mean, I had to decide, do I want an army here in 10 minutes, or should I just try and deal with these 2 guys that are here now? But it was so dirty, and if that's available to them as a tool, then none of us are safe. Certainly us, like weirdo libs in provincial little right-wing towns like I am.
Well, Eric, I would strongly suggest that if you think that your civil rights were violated here, that you reach out to the ACLU or to a local attorney. I mean, that's not a good thing if it happened exactly the way you're describing it. And it should not be happening. It's 44 minutes, almost 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Project Censored in about 5 minutes and see what are the latest really cool stories. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Abby in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Hey, Abby, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm well.
I wanted to follow up on a call that you had last Thursday from a guy who brought up the issue of gas rationing. I kept screaming at this guy to get out of my head because it's a thing I've been thinking about for years. And you were a little bit dismissive of him, but let me try to flesh this out a little bit.
Okay.
I like to call it personal cap and trade. And the big thing here is, and I'm a few years younger than you are, but I'm old enough to remember the gas crunches in the late 70s and early 80s. And I used to say to myself, people were saying, well, the free market should dictate the price of gas, and then people will use less gas. And I thought, that's not fair to poor people who depend on their cars to get to work and back.
Yeah.
So I said at the time, I'd rather see gas rationing than $3 a gallon gas. And this was at a time that gas wasn't quite $1 a gallon yet.
Right.
And somebody wrote an article in the LA Times, and I can't remember who the guy's name was, but this was years ago, and suggested a gray market for gas rationing in which everybody gets an equal quota, everybody gets an equal number of gas coupons, but instead of the World War II scenario where they were not transferable, this time they are transferable. And if you don't use any gas, you can sell your gas coupons to somebody that really needs that gas for their SUV. And what it would do to trigger behavior. And it's sort of a market-based solution, because instead of the market for the price of gas, it's the market for the right to buy gas. So if you're a poor person that never uses any gas, you can make money on your coupons. The less gas you buy, the more money you make on your coupons. And it's an immediate behavior motivator and demotivator. If you use a lot of gas, you're going to start looking for ways to buy less gas, because you have to buy a lot of coupons. You're spending all your money buying more coupons from other people. So that's why and I think this can be applied to a lot of resources that are finite, and gasoline and oil, and the ability to absorb the pollution from the oil is a finite resource. So that's why I kind of disagreed with your dismissiveness, but I think the guy that presented the argument in the first, he didn't bring out the gray market aspect of this, where people would be free to buy and sell their coupons to each other, right. And that would be a lot better motivator than the system that you've been advocating, where there's a price on carbon and everybody gets the same check at the end of the month. People don't think about that check at the end of the month when they feel the immediate price at the pump. But they do feel the money that they're.
I think they'll think about that check at the end of the month when they start getting it. I mean, but how would people? Are you suggesting that the federal government just like mail out 10 coupons to everybody in America and say, here's some free gasoline, and now start buying and selling the coupon? How would you do this?
The coupons wouldn't be for the gas. The price of gas would be set at some level, but the coupons would be able to rise and fall in price according to market conditions. And I mean, the devil is in the details.
And they give you the right to buy the gas, or they give you a discount on the gas?
They give you a right to buy the gas.
So this is like the way that we rationed butter back during World War II.
I don't remember back that far, but
I remember my dad telling me, my mom and dad telling me about it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Bobby, let me ponder it.
Say gas is $1 a gallon, and if you run out of coupons, you're going to have to spend more than $1 a gallon, because you're going to have to buy coupons from somebody.
Right, I get it. Bobby, maybe brilliant idea. I don't know, but thank you very much for the idea. Thanks for the call, and happy Thanksgiving. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Mickey Huff about Project Censored in just a moment. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. It's 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And on the line with us is the director of Project Censored, the president of the Media Freedom Foundation, a professor of social science and history, and the co-host of the Project Censored show, and the co-editor with Andy Lee Roth of the new forthcoming book, State of the Free Press 2022, all over at projectcensored.org. Mickey Huff. Hey, Mickey, welcome to the program. So tell us, first of all, for people who are not familiar with Project Censored, give us a snapshot of the organization, what y'all are doing and what the award is.
Absolutely. Tom, it's great to be on with you. It's been a minute since we've crossed paths. Much has been afoot at Project Censored since then, and we continue to do the annual book. We started our own publishing imprint this past year on the Censored Press. We are a media watchdog organization that was founded in 1976. We are a critical media literacy education organization. So we want to teach people how to critically navigate an increasingly complicated media ecosystem. So each year we have students research independent and alternative news sources to find the most significant underreported or censored news stories that either don't make it into the corporate media at all, omission, or when they do, they're significantly distorted. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the elevator pitch about what we do at Project Censored is we report the news that doesn't make the news, and we analyze why. We do an annual book. We have a weekly radio program on 50 stations. We do documentary films. And most significantly, it's our curriculum that you can get for free at projectcensored.org on critical media literacy. This year, for example, in the book that's out in early December, we had over 200 students and about 20 faculty from 10 campuses doing research on the top stories this year. And then there are scores of other people involved along the way. So the network is broadening. And unfortunately, Tom, as you well know and cover every day, we need media watchdogs and people trying to uncensor the corporate media every day.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, and I've been aware of Project Censored for a long time. Because I've received 4-year awards. But anyhow,
indeed, you have.
I found your number 6 story this year, or actually, this is from the 2019 and 2020 year. I guess you haven't yet published your 2021 ones.
That's coming out in December, early December.
Okay.
So you're now looking. If you're looking at that, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it was the
ahead.
shadow. The fact that there are 450 of these right-wing websites pretending to be local news organizations, and I would say at the same time that hedge funds now control more than half of all local newspapers in America. But there's this shadow network that people think are real news that are run by crazed right-wingers. 450 of these.
Yeah, and that's probably a more conservative estimate. And basically, it's you go anything from astroturfing to the propaganda of native advertising to the different groups that will infiltrate organizations to spread disinformation. These are major problems. I think the story that you're talking about was from last year, but this year in the book that's not yet out, we've got another example of the kind of thing with organizations that want to blacklist people that report about crimes or violations of human rights, particularly around issues of Palestine, particularly around the elections that are taking place in Nicaragua, and of course the longstanding efforts of the U.S. to destabilize Venezuela. So, again, in the last several years, we've been talking a lot about the problems of fake news, but not as though they're new and not in a weaponized way. But again, back to critical media literacy education, we want people to be able to understand and sort of deconstruct this kind of media propaganda on their own. The great hope, of course, would be such that Project Censored or our curriculum wouldn't be needed. But unfortunately, it is because of stories like you just mentioned, that there are really pernicious and insidious ways that information ecosystems have been both infiltrated and distorted. And we need to be trying to teach people how to think critically, not what to think.
Yeah, amen. We're talking with Mickey Huff, the director of Project Censored, projectcensored.org, the website. Myth Info is Mickey's Twitter handle. By the way, just speaking of the news, just breaking right now, all 3 defendants have been found guilty of murder in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in his death, and so that's kind of after the Rittenhouse verdict. That's I think a little bit of reassuring news. Mickey? The newspapers around America, the local newspapers, half of them being owned by hedge funds. What does this mean for America?
Well, this is a long process of deregulation and corporate conglomerate ownership. We had people like Ben Bigdikian, as you know, as a canary in that media coal mine in the early 80s, warning about deregulation, warning about media conglomerates. The Clinton 96 telecom bill really
that was the one that really kneecapped the whole thing, wasn't it, when Bill Clinton signed that in 96?
We've now got half a dozen corporations controlling about 90% of the media, about 4 to 5 in the tech sector for social media and online internet control. It's a really major problem, which is why we focus on the alternative and independent journalists that are still out there, still reporting in weekly, still reporting online, but they're overlooked, right? The corporate media don't look at these kind of stories. These are bottom-up stories that look at marginalized communities, that look at social justice issues, that look at corporate corruption. In other words, these are the kind of stories that the press, the corporate press, should be dealing with. They should be covering, right? You know, we want to follow, and we follow clearly. In this year's book, by the way, the foreword was written by Danielle McLean of the Society of Professional Journalists. And one of the things we educate over and over and over again is we say that people should follow the SPJ's Code of Ethics. Journalists should seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, and be accountable and transparent. And at Project Censored, that's the kind of journalism we've honored for 45 years.
Amen. Mickey Huff, projectcensored.org is the website. Check it out. Mickey, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Great talking with you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Tom. You too. Take care.
Thank you. We'll be right back. It's, boy, there's so much. We've got a new chancellor in Germany. I got to tell you about that right after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for newsreaders. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people. End of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads, and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. We've got a new German government, and I just wanted to point out that this new German government, at least finally they're referring to it as a center-left government. This is the New York Times today. For the first time in 16 years, Germany will have a center-left government and a new chancellor, Olaf Scholz, a social democrat. They've created a coalition with the Greens and with the Free Democrats, who are sort of like, there's sort of like the problem solvers caucus in the Democratic, which spans both the Democratic and Republican parties, but basically the Free Democrats are the ones who believe in neoliberalism. They're the leftover neoliberals. Now, but they're sort of progressive. But what's amazing is that this article by Katrine Benhold starts out, for the first time in 16 years, Germany will have a center-left government. Which raises the question, what the hell is center-left? I mean, Angela Merkel governed a country, Germany, for 16 years, or for however many years it was, maybe they're abutting her with with another conservative, but in any case, I think it's probably her. In any case, this is a country where if a woman wants an abortion during the first 3 months, the state pays for it. It's free. No questions asked, no big deal. You don't have to show up days apart. You don't have. So this is a right-wing government? Really? This is not a center-left government? Angela Merkel's conservatives run a country where every corporation with over 1,000 employees is required to not only have a union, they're called works councils, but to have that works council make up half of their board of directors. And now, for the first time in 16 years, they're getting a center-left government. This wasn't center-left. In Merkel's Germany, there is a minimum of 24 workdays of paid vacation a year, 9 to 12 paid public holidays, 5 to 6 weeks of, and most employers offer 5 or 6 weeks of paid holidays. What's mandated is a minimum of 24 workdays of paid vacation. Merkel's conservative Germany, employers are required to pay 100% of salary for up to 6 weeks when somebody gets sick. If a person is disabled by the illness or injury in Merkel's Germany, this is the conservative according to the New York Times, the employer has to pay a minimum of 70% of salary for up to 78 weeks. Merkel's conservative Germany has one of the best, most modern public transit systems in the world. Wealthy people pay a top income tax rate of over 50% in Germany. And by the way, you don't have to do your taxes. The government does your taxes for you and sends you the form. The only time you need to fill out anything or submit it to the government with regard to taxes in Germany is if you think they owe you money and you want to try and prove it. Angela Merkel, the person that the New York Times today is telling us was not center-left during the last 16 years, Angela Merkel invited 1.5 million, mostly Syrian, almost all Muslim refugees into Germany all at once. 1.5 million. That would be the equivalent of Joe Biden inviting 6.1 million non-white, non-Christian refugees into the United States. And she got applause for this. It is producing a little bit of tension right now, but she got applause for this. Here in the United States, we have 810 people out of every 100,000 Americans in prison, or having been recently in prison. In Germany, it's 78 out of 100,000. Here, it's 810. In Germany, it's 78. When Angela Merkel became chancellor of Germany, there was not a minimum wage. Why? Because everybody was unionized, but she set one. The minimum standards now in Germany are that you get free health care, you have subsidized housing, you have up to $1,377 a month that the government gives you as a, quote, pension for low-income and retired workers. This is both their welfare program and their Social Security program. Free education all the way up to PhD or MD. In fact, there's over 300,000 people foreigners going to German schools for free, colleges for free. And a minimum wage of $11 an hour, which ain't bad if you don't have to pay for health care, you don't have to pay for education, you get subsidies for your housing. In fact, in 2014, this Chancellor Merkel, who the New York Times today is referring to as a conservative, pushed through a legislation that made all public college and universities in Germany tuition free. All of them. She also pushed through a law in 2013 guaranteeing 7 hours a day of free daycare and education for 3 to 6-year-olds. And in many parts of the country, actually, your child could qualify if your child is over 1 year old. This is conservative? I mean, housing is a right in Germany. Legal residents are entitled to housing assistance in Germany. Owning a gun in Germany is like owning a car in the United States. This is the conservative country. It's like owning a car in the United States. You must pass both a proficiency test and a written test. You must get a license to own a gun. You must register it with the government every year. Assault weapons and weapons of war are banned. In conservative Merkel's Germany, they're shutting down their last nuclear power plant probably next year. And solar power costs half of what it costs here in the United States. And solar panels are everywhere. Here in the United States, your internet service provider can literally snoop on everything you do. They can read your email. They can not just can, they do record every website you visit and sell that information to other people. In Germany, that's a felony. If an internet service provider tried to spy on Germans the way that the big internet service providers in the United States routinely spy on all of us, they would go to prison. There are drug prices. Here we've got drugs that cost $2-3 to manufacture and are sold for $10,000-$20,000. I mean, it's mind-boggling. In Germany, here's what the federal law says, quote, the pharmacy sales price for prescription drugs is determined by adding a margin of 3% to the wholesale price, plus a fixed pharmacy service compensation of $8.35 euros plus the value-added tax. We have 60,000 untested chemicals in our homes and in our food supply in the United States that they don't have in Germany because they require the precautionary principle. And yet the New York Times today is telling us that for the first time, Germany is getting a center-left government. What am I missing here? Anyhow, it's a fascinating time to be alive, is it not? So let me. I was going to pick up your phone calls. I think it said we'll take a quick break and then I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side. There's a whole lot going on in the world. There's a lot to talk about. And I've got a great crazy alert for you, too, that we'll get to in a little bit. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls in just a moment. 14 and a half minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Steve in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Steve. Happy Thanksgiving. What's up?
Well, I have my customized things that I'm thankful for, and I believe that you and your audience will share it. I've been advised to make it short. So here are some of the things I'm thankful for this Thanksgiving. Nurses, doctors, teachers, ethical first responders, frontline workers like grocery store workers, Black Lives Matter, and all activists on behalf of voting rights, the environment, fair elections, anti-war, anti-Pentagon, and reproductive rights activists. I'm thankful for the prosecutors and law enforcement and investigators who are going after the Trump cult insurgent criminals. I'm thankful for school board members who stand up to the MAGA cult, the censors. I'm grateful for the volunteers at abortion clinics who protect doctors and women from attacks. I'm grateful to Mother Nature, evolutionary biology, and the Big Bang, because without those, none of us would be here. And finally, I'm thankful for progressive talk show hosts and their staffs, especially the ones who are superior to all others. I will leave it to you to figure out who I'm talking about.
Thank you, Steve. It's a great list. I'm thankful for you and all of our listeners and viewers, people who help support this program. it's a great time to be thankful. And Steve, thank you. That is an absolutely marvelous list. Chelsea in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Chelsea, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I wanted to talk about the relationship between the Build Back Better.
Excuse me.
No, you're okay. Between Build Back Better and COVID denial. Workers have been conditioned for decades to believe that there is no personal health emergency or, death in the family that is significant enough to be worthy of them missing work. And so I think that really laid the groundwork for suspicion when we had the COVID epidemic, and suddenly they're being told, well, you're probably not going to even die from this, but, we're going to shut everything down. And I think that laid the space for the conservatives to come in with their conspiracies. And similarly, I think that by allowing pharmaceutical companies, like specifically Purdue Pharma, to overtly lie and to convince doctors to overtly lie to patients about the safety of medications, again, you've got, if you look at the areas where COVID denial is the worst, it is a very close overlap over the areas that Purdue Pharma targeted. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And so I think that the infrastructure bill actually is going to improve our outlook going forward, for if we have another emergency like this, God forbid, because we won't be so conditioned to, mistrust, if that makes sense.
It does, and you make a good case for it, Chelsea. I would add that we have significant foreign interference here, and you've got Donald Trump having been all over the map, because at the beginning of the pandemic he was like, okay, we're going to, I'm going to be the president and do something about this. And then on April 7th, when he discovered it was mostly killing black people and in blue states, he decided enough of this already and started worrying about the economy and getting reelected. And so we've had these schizophrenic messages. It's been a real mess. But Chelsea, thank you. That's a great analysis. You can make a living as a political analyst. That was a good one. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties and for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Denise in Albany, Oregon. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I know this is a little bit a while ago, but talking about the Medicare versus Medicare
Advantage,
plagiarizing the Medicare Advantage. What I'm finding, and I've received 2 letters in the last week, is more and more care providers are indicating they will no longer take any Medicare patients. So it's adding to the I'm having trouble with the word, but dissolving the Medicare in the whole scheme of things, because the people who need it most cannot get care.
Yeah, Medicare is under assault. There's no doubt about that, Denise. And Medicare Advantage is leading the charge on that. But you're right. There are providers who will refuse to take Medicare, which is bizarre because it's so painless. I mean, it's the amount of effort involved in taking Medicare Advantage can be substantial for a healthcare provider. They've got to pre-approve everything, and some things get turned down, and all that. You got to make sure that the people are in network and all that whole song and dance. But it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. Denise, thank you for the call. Lance in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Lance, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, good afternoon. Hey, Tom, I just wanted to talk about, you had played this clip from JFK, what it means to be a liberal. And that ties in so good with the Build Back Better program.
So let me just play that for you, if you'd like.
Play that clip.
And we can talk about it. Here's President John Kennedy. Actually, this was candidate John Kennedy. This was 1960. He was in New York City. I'm pretty sure he was speaking before the Liberal Club or the Liberal Party in New York City. Here he is.
What do our opponents mean when they apply to us the label liberal? If by liberal they mean, as they want people to believe, someone who is soft in his policies abroad, who is against local government, and who is unconcerned with the taxpayer's dollar, then the record of this party and its members demonstrate that we are not that kind of liberal. But if by a liberal they mean someone who looks ahead and not behind, someone who welcomes new ideas without rigid reactions, someone who cares about the welfare of the people, their health, their housing, their schools, their jobs, their civil rights and their civil liberties, someone who believes that we can break through the stalemate and suspicions that grip us in our policies abroad. If that is what they mean by a liberal, then I'm proud to say that I'm a liberal.
There you go, John Kennedy. So, Lance, you had a riff based on that little speech, or that little piece of that speech.
Yes. That speech is awesome, because when you think of that speech and think about how Biden tried to pass the Build Back Better program, they go together, and this is something the Democrats should push, because a lot of times their messages are not getting out there, because unfortunately Republicans are very good by getting their messages out. So the Democrats are playing catch up, but they need to run on that clip because it is so timely.
Yeah, I'm with you. Lance, thank you. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to play that. It's been a while. Thank you very much. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
I'm pretty good, Tom. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, Bill.
Happy Thanksgiving, Tom. And I'm thankful for you because you're so smart and you're also so humble. You won't admit that you can read a barcode or a QR code.
I can't read a QR code. So
yes, you can. You won't admit it. I get it.
Okay, so what's on your mind, Bill?
Anyway, you had mentioned Tokyo Rose earlier, and I'm not sure if you know of her real story and or anything about her.
Yeah, I was poking around the internet this morning to get a hot link, for my reference to Tokyo Rose in the op-ed at Hartmann Report, and I found one about, there's a Wikipedia page on her, of course, but there's also a bunch of sites suggesting that, she wasn't really that person, and there was another person, and, et cetera, et cetera.
She was a victim of the Rush Limbaugh of her time, Walter Winchell, and she was born on the 4th of July in California, went to UCLA and graduated. And for a graduation gift, her family gave her a trip to Japan to visit her ailing aunt. While she was there, war broke out. Her family was put in detention camps in America, and the Japanese tried to pressure her into renouncing her American citizenship, and she refused. And she couldn't get work, so she moved to Tokyo, where she got a job working for Radio Tokyo, and just as a typist. And there was a gentleman, a major, Cousins from the Australian Army, because there was right in the center of Tokyo, there was an Allied POW camp, and she used to give supplies through the fence to them at night. And this guy, Cousins, was a well-known broadcaster who'd been captured. So he wrote material, and she used it, but none of it was ever propaganda. On the other hand, they used things the Japanese couldn't understand about American language with nuance and sarcasm and things, and they would just say things like, here's your propaganda now, here's the stupid stuff we have to tell you. And and her name wasn't even Tokyo Rose, it was Orphan Ann, and there were dozens of women broadcasters who did do those evil things, but she didn't. And she, after the war, she was arrested by American intelligence, and she was held for a year in jail before they realized she didn't do anything wrong, and she was released.
Wow.
And she was broke. And, okay. Anyway, she went to America, and she was put in jail for 6 years. Her citizenship was taken away, and she was finally
exonerated.
And I used to see her in Chicago every day.
Amazing. Amazing. Bill, I got to run, but what an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with my crazy alert and your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
The subtitle, and social collapse. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video op-ed over at thomhartmann.com. So have you ever heard of molnupiravir? It's a new drug that actually looks like it reduces the probability that you will end up hospitalized or dead from COVID-19. It's a 5-day course. You take a pill every day for 5 days. It costs Merck, the company that is selling it, $17.74 to make that 5-day, 5 pills. And they are selling it to you and me, to the federal government, for $712 per 5 pills, per, treatment course. And you say, what? And here's where it gets really interesting. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is part of the Department of Defense, provided $10 million of funding to Emory University to develop this drug, and $19 million in additional grants came from the National Institutes of Health. We paid to develop this drug, and now we're going to pay $700 for it? Really? Check it out. There's a video over at thomhartmann.com all about it. And welcome back. Whoop. Arg. My IFB here is in a battle with my ear. Okay, welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I did want to share with you our crazy alert for the day. This is absolutely nuts. The QAnon people are back in Dallas at Dealey Plaza, the place where John Kennedy was assassinated. They've been there for weeks now, waiting for John and his son, John Jr., to appear from the dead, resurrected from the dead. It's remarkable, and they got together again this week. There are people who are mourning within their families the loss of family members to this cult. Broadly to the QAnon cult all across the United States, broadly, but in this case specifically, people who have left their families. The phrase that's used in this one story over at Raw Story is that It's like, there are parallels between QAnon's Texas Pilgrims and the People's Crusade, where lay people took up arms en masse to defend the Holy Land in the Middle Ages. I would say it's probably more like, tilting at windmills, shall we say? But, it's I shouldn't laugh. This is a real tragedy, and it's happening to our neighbors and friends, and ultimately, this is also a real threat to our democracy. Anyhow, 36 minutes past the hour, and let's pick up your phone calls here. Mike in Memphis. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Oh, several things. I hope you're brave and don't be tempted to hit the disconnect button. But there's a couple of things I'd like to get off my chest, I guess, if I could.
I'm listening.
I was wondering if the president will come out and console people who are not necessarily convinced of this latest jury decision. And also if,
Wait a minute.
people will be apologized to.
Wait a minute. Console people because 3 guys who killed a black man were just convicted?
Well, no. You remember when he came out and called the kid in Wisconsin nefariously named it with no evidence of that, and came out and said, I know lots of you are disappointed, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I've never seen a president do that. And
well, then you haven't watched. Richard Nixon famously weighed in on one of the verdicts. Was that Charles Manson? As I recall, it was one of them. And, long before the trial even happened, the presidents have weighed in on this kind of stuff forever, Mike. What's your point?
Well, the point, I guess, what I'm trying to get to is, number one, I think these jurors probably are owed an apology for being called, not being able to render a correct decision.
Yeah. Mike,
they were basically, no, let me finish. I know you want to do it, but now that these trials are over, I wonder, and I really called in about the hypocrisy of how cases are chosen. I wonder now that these 2 cases are over, if the focus will be on a man obviously filled with hate against certain people, and attack them in a parade will be getting as much attention as one person. 6 people were killed.
Right. So in other words, what you want me to do on this show, Mike, is shift the focus, like Right Wing Radio has done, to, oh my God, did you see that a black man killed a bunch of people, with a car? Or no, Mike, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You can get all outraged. A black man did kill a bunch of people with a car. It's a terrible thing. He's a career criminal. And, the color of his skin is, I think, relatively inconsequential. It wasn't that he was killing people because of the color of their skin. He was trying to flee a crime. So trying to racialize that, Mike, as I know, my colleagues on Right Wing Radio are doing right now, is, in my opinion, pathetic. Kyle Rittenhouse, on the other hand, was at a protest for racial justice. And he killed 2 people and tried to kill a 3rd. And that, frankly, was about race. And I think you have to acknowledge that. Dan in Altoona. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So that last caller really ticked me off. I want to make a quick comment real quick with that. That guy was a career criminal. He was fleeing a stabbing. He's been known to run people over with his car before, including his baby mama, and he should have been in jail for a long time. So that's one. 2, Kyle Rittenhouse went to that protest knowing that there would be Black Lives Matter people there with a gun, and he was on the militia side. So that proves that point there,
plus there's multiple photographs of him flashing white power signs with militia members.
Yep, and there was a phone call that he made to one of his friends saying that he wished he had a gun to kill people. That's just, it was inadmissible in court, but it's out there. Yeah. So that was a bullcrap thing right there that's just said. But I wanted to actually touch on unemployment. I worked for the unemployment system here in Pennsylvania for a couple years, and I know that Pennsylvania has a 6-month term for unemployment, and that's why these numbers kind of make me double think everything, because 6 months from November 1st would be around May or April or May.
Mm-hmm.
So everything before that, everybody that lost their job before that and still can't find work are no longer eligible for unemployment, and that brings that number way down.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case, Dan. And we've all talked about this in the past. We saw the same thing in 2007, 2008, or 2008, 2009. Where so many people lost their jobs that they rolled off the unemployment rolls, and then it looked like employment was getting better. And so, yes, we have the lowest unemployment since 1969, I think it is. But that doesn't mean that it's actually the lowest unemployment. That just means that those are the government numbers. But, typically the government numbers are apples to apples, but not even if they're not accurate. But your point is well made.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Just stay positive, everybody. And, we had a good verdict today, which is another thing that I wanted to question what that guy wanted you to say about that. I mean, the guys that were found guilty today, they went after a black guy jogging.
Yeah.
And pretty much lynched him. So
yeah, his points were the core white right-wing grievance stuff that's being peddled on right-wing radio right now, which is, Rittenhouse was a hero and Joe Biden slandered him on the one hand, or was not guilty anyway, and Joe Biden slandered him, and how dare he, and a black guy killed some people. Why isn't everybody talking about this like it's a racial crime? Well, because it's not. And yeah, there you go.
Well,
Dan, go ahead.
Can I make one last point with that, with the Biden thing? The right-wing hate sphere right now is going after Biden for apparently calling him Kyle a white supremacist.
Right.
But that's not true. He never called him a white supremacist. There was an ad that was run that Joe Biden had tweeted that was a big, long video of Donald Trump not telling the Proud Boys to stand down. And his picture, Kyle's picture, was thrown on the screen whenever they mentioned Kenosha. So there was never a time where he said that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist. His picture was just in a video that was talking about white supremacy.
Okay. All right. It seems frankly irrelevant to me anyway, Dan, given the horrors of some of the things that are going on in this country. Dan, thanks for the call. Steve in Zimmerman, Minnesota. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to say Thanksgiving coming up in a couple of days here.
Tomorrow.
That I wanted to say, I'm from Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, tomorrow, yeah. I'm from Minnesota, and I just want to say I'm thankful for three things: the state of Georgia, the normal judge they had in the Arbery case, and for them giving us Anthony Edwards on the Timberwolves.
Okay. All right. It's noted, Steve, and I hope you and your family have a wonderful Thanksgiving and y'all keep safe. Okay?
Thank you, too.
Okay, thanks. We're doing our best. And please, everybody, if you go back and look at the statistics from last year, because of Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had this absolute explosion of people dying from COVID in the United States through the end of December and into January. We don't want to do that again. Be careful.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. 45 minutes past the hour. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
D.B. Cooper Day.
Is today D.B. Cooper Day? Really?
Yes, sir. 1971. I remember it. I was 6 years old.
Yeah, they found some of his cash down the road here.
Oh, yeah, right. Hopefully they'll solve that mystery someday. It's a pretty interesting story.
It is.
And I apologize. My damn phone is stuck on the speaker screen, and I can't get off of it. So
that's fine. As long as you hold the microphone up to your mouth, I can't tell the difference, Maverick. What's up?
Yeah. I hear you say that all the time. That's why I'm doing it. All right. I got a great nickname for you for Senator Joe Manchin. Old King Cole.
Ha! Yeah, there you go.
I got that from Bo of the Fifth Column, who also rewrote the Pledge of Allegiance to I pledge allegiance to liberty and justice for all, period. I love that.
Yeah, there you go. But you called about oil.
For you, though. What's that?
You called about oil, did you not?
Yeah, my question for you, though, is I'm pretty sure I've heard you say a couple of times that we're a net exporter of petroleum. Is that right?
We're also an importer, but here's what happened.
And why?
It's a damn good question. What happened was we were there was a ban on exporting crude oil itself in the United States. And my recollection is that goes back to the 70s, back to the Arab oil embargo, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure exactly when that went into place, but under law, it was illegal to export unrefined, unprocessed oil products from the United States. And we hit a point during the Obama administration when, as I recall, it could have been during the George W. Bush administration, actually. I need to go back and look this up, Maverick, but it's not a secret. It should be fairly easy to find. We hit a point where we were basically oil independent. We were importing, or we were producing, and this was the result of fracking. We were producing enough oil and natural gas that we no longer needed to import any. And at that point, the billionaires in the oil business got the law changed. So it was then legal to export oil. So we started exporting oil that was drilled in the vicinity, more or less, of, or at the end of pipelines, near our ports, particularly down in Texas. And that allowed us, or caused us, or forced us to have to continue to import oil from Saudi Arabia. The whole idea originally was, get off the oil imports. But now it's legal to export it as well. So, in theory, we are energy independent. But in actual practice, we are importing oil from the Middle East. We are exporting oil to South America and Asia. And of course, we've been exporting refined oil products all along. One of the largest refineries that takes the Canadian tar sands oil and, through a pipeline all the way across the middle of the United States is down on the Gulf Coast. I believe it's owned by the Koch bunch, but I, don't cast that in stone. And we get the poison, and they export the refined petroleum products, and that's been going on for quite a while. Make sense?
That's a mess.
Yeah, I think you could say that. And it's because we don't really have an energy policy here in the United States, and we need to have one. We need to have a comprehensive energy policy. Maverick, thanks a lot.
Thanks for answering that question.
You're welcome.
Have yourself a happy holiday.
Thank you. You too. Happy Thanksgiving. It is 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 50 minutes, 10 minutes before the hour, and Jane in Gadsden, Alabama. Jane, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to tell you I'm thankful for you, and my prayer is that next year at this time, that we have things to be thankful for. I'm
with
so
you, Jane.
worried. I am so worried and upset, and people around here, you said where I live, people here are not worried about it.
Yeah.
And anyway, what I called about today, Tom, is President Biden went to the climate change conference and made promises, and then he comes over here and he allows all these leases to go forward. What is up with this?
I don't know, Jane. We are...
I mean, I had a hard time believing it was true. I told my stepson, we were talking about it, and he told me about it, and I said, I just don't believe it.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if this is just, hypocrisy, or if this was a process that was initiated before he came into office and he couldn't stop it, or it would have been more trouble and difficulty to stop, then not do it. Or if it's, the simple fact that any politician who takes actions that drive up the price of oil over the short term, that politician and their party is going to pay a price for that, when Americans see gas prices go up.
Right.
What it is, Jane, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, it's stumping me, I tell you, and if it's something that he couldn't help, he needs to get out there and tell it, because I am a huge supporter, and it's causing me to have my doubts, and he needs to broadcast it far and wide.
Yeah. Well, Jane, over this holiday weekend, I'll see what I can learn about that, and maybe we can, get back together on it on Monday. But let me look into it.
Tom.
I'm sorry, I just don't know off the top of my head. Whoop, I'm sorry. Jane, I set my finger down. I thought I didn't realize I was pushing the button. I just cut you off. My apologies. Bill but I did put Bill on the air. Bill in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's up? Bill? I am not hearing Bill. Let's try Timothy in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Timothy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm Timothy. Hi, Tom.
Yes, sir.
Tom? Yeah, I'm really concerned about what's going on. I grew up, went to school, worked, married, divorced, Portland. And I love Portland. And are you there, Tom?
I am. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. I got my TV on, but they told me to turn it down. Yeah. Anyway, I'm real concerned about what's going on in our country. There's a lot of hate. White power people running Texas, taking human rights away. And I know people from there, and there's good people there. And if we don't unite, Tom, we're done.
Yeah.
We got a lot of problems to solve. I got a sign on my car, and I don't care who hears it or who reads it. It says, we unite or we cook. Our star system is changing. Yeah. We learn, we change, we remain. It's from my heart, bro.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Timothy.
We got to unite or else we're done.
Yeah, no, Ben Franklin said it, when they got together at the Constitutional Convention, we must hang together or we shall surely hang separately. Timothy, thank you for the call. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, happy Thanksgiving Eve, Tom, and I'm thankful to you and your team for all the truth and knowledge you bring us every day, so thank you so much for that. Thank you. And, pursuant to your rant about Germany, I want to begin by pointing out that Canada, they held a national election last month. All three major candidates were in favor of an assault weapons ban, including the Conservative. So, in 2020, when Beto O'Rourke talked about banning and buying back assault weapons, that's already a mainstream idea, if not in actuality, in every other Western democracy.
It's true.
Yeah, and in my opinion, Tom, we need more passion like Beto's coming from Democratic leadership. You know who Jonathan Alter is. You've had him on the show. He wrote a book about FDR. He was on Lawrence O'Donnell last night. Mm-hmm. He was talking about how FDR not only went after rich people, but he also went after Republican members of Congress. And Alter also brought up how Harry Truman rescued his presidency by calling out the do-nothing 1940s Republican Congress.
Right.
So, it's high time President Biden steps up his rhetoric against these present-day do-nothing Republicans, as well as their anti-democracy measures, calling that out. And, in doing so, I think he'll make a clear case for getting rid of the filibuster. Your friend and colleague Joe Madison is putting his health on the line with the hunger strike, highlighting how, if we don't get these voting bills passed, we're going to face unimaginable uphill battles in 2022 and 2024. I have some ideas how to get out the vote. I'll save it for another day. But, without these bills, it will be a struggle. So, but as you say, and Bernie says, not only is despair is not an option, I would add we have no choice but to strengthen our resolve and redouble our efforts. Your thoughts, Tom, and I wish you a great holiday.
Well, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to you too, Jeff, and I just endorse everything you just said. Thank you, very well done. Richard in San Francisco. Hey, Richard, we just have a little less than a minute. You got a quick one?
Yeah, just kind of a silly question, but this morning there was a picture online of Kyle Rittenhouse meeting with Trump in the fake Oval Office of Mar-a-Lago, wherever it is, and in Florida. And they were both standing, and I noticed that Trump did his thumbs up, his standard pose where he stands with his thumbs up at waist level, and then Rittenhouse was mirroring that at waist level. And I just wondered, is that one of these kind of secret handshake deals that the
I think that's just Trump's thing. I don't know, Richard. I haven't seen the picture, so I frankly can't speak to it. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back. Well, we'll be back soon. Post Thanksgiving. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you to actually participate. Be a part of it. Get inside your local Democratic Party or Republican Party if you're a Republican of goodwill. Let's both these parties. Let's take them back and turn America in a positive direction. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.